When do we give up? When do we just close our eyes and say, that's it? This water's too polluted. This disease too far along. To a Spartan, the answer is simple. Never. Because Michigan State was founded on the belief that our purpose is to make the world a better place. And when you're open to unconventional thinking, you value people's differences and are willing to work harder, push farther, and forge true partnerships. Then and only then can you solve the world's toughest problems. Better, faster. Like renewable energy, clean water, Parkinson's disease, and fighting malaria. Things Spartans work on every single day, all without fanfare. Because we know our true triumph lies in the impact we make on the world around us. And after all, if we don't do it, who will? Spartans will.
From the first hour in the morning, when students, faculty, and staff log in for the day, to the millions of emails sent and applications accessed far into the evening, we are behind the ever-present technology interactions of hundreds of thousands of people at Michigan State University. We are MSU Information Technology, passionate people who care deeply about providing technology to support MSU's academic, administrative, and research missions. Like any successful organization, it comes down to the people. People with diverse backgrounds willing to learn, engage, and connect with the global MSU community. For more than half a century, we've been partnering with researchers, faculty, and business units on effective solutions to move MSU forward. We deliver technologies to classrooms, computer labs, residence halls, and offices on and off campus, manage the IT infrastructure, provide secure paths to big data, and design and develop applications that inform and engage. There is no shortage of a variety in the work or opportunities to learn new things. MSU IT relies on the central department, partnering with the hundreds of IT personnel in colleges and departments to cover all of the unique needs the university has. Professional development in IT is imperative, and that's why we continually invest in the growth of our talent. Exposure to industry standards and best practices is part of our daily routine. So the next time you post online, log into a course, send a file across the world, or harness supercomputer power for groundbreaking research, think of us. Michigan State University Information Technology.
IceCube is a project that gets a lot of people excited because it's down at the South Pole. It's looking for particles coming from outer space, some of the highest energy particles we've ever observed. So it really fires people's imagination. I'm Tyce DeYoung. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Michigan State University. I'm the deputy spokesperson for the IceCube neutrino experiment. Neutrinos are fundamental particles. They're basic constituents of matter like electrons or quarks. They're sort of a question mark. They're a mystery.
Neutrinos are everywhere. They're a subatomic particle that's produced in interactions all around the universe. Like the sun produces 70 billion neutrinos that go through your thumbnail every second of every day of your life. Even though trillions and trillions and trillions streaming through your body, only one or two or a few will interact with you in your lifetime. So neutrinos barely interact, but they're plentiful.
And so if you want to detect neutrinos, you need a really, really big target. Michigan State is one of 44 universities and national laboratories around the world that participate in the IceCube project. We've got almost 300 physicists working on it. IceCube is the world's largest neutrino detector. We have gone down to the United States South Pole Station at the South Pole in Antarctica. The ice cap at the South Pole is almost 3 kilometers thick, which makes it an ideal target for neutrinos coming from outer space. We embed photosensors in the ice cap, which are sensitive enough to detect faint flashes of light which occur when neutrinos interact with protons or neutrons inside of the ice. This is the world's largest neutrino detector. It's got a mass of almost 1 billion tons of the ice cap that we monitor, which is roughly a cube, a kilometer on a side.
Last time, officially going in the hole. What's the kick plate? All right, everybody.
Even though it's the cheapest place to do it, that doesn't mean it's easy. There's a lot of challenges to working at the South Pole. It's almost like being on a space station. You're probably 1,000 miles from the nearest other humans, and if you want to go outside you can, but it gets awful cold awful quick. So everyone's packed in close quarters, working as hard as they can on whatever project has brought them there. And of course, if you want food, if you want water, anything you want, you've got to fly that in on a military cargo aircraft. That's not cheap. So even the water that we drink, what we have to do, we melt a well in the Antarctic ice cap. We're only allowed to take 2 showers a week, and we only get 2 minutes of running water in those showers. So in combination with being in close quarters, it's maybe not an ideal working environment, but it's the place we have to go to do our science, so we're excited to be able to go down there. We're really excited. We've been getting some great results from the IceCube Neutrino Observatory. Just 2 years ago, we announced that we had detected astrophysical neutrinos coming from somewhere outside of our solar system. This is only the 2nd time that neutrinos from outside of our solar system were ever observed, and these are by far the highest energy neutrinos that have ever been detected. Actually, collecting the data is, in some sense, almost the easiest part of the data analysis. Once we've recorded our data, once we've recorded this light produced by neutrinos interacting in the ice cap, we have to apply lots of extremely intensive computational techniques in order to make sense of what we've seen. The high-performance computing cluster available at ICER is a critical component of our collaboration-wide effort to analyze the data that we record. We hope that by studying neutrinos, we can better understand the structure of the universe. Historically, when we've asked these sorts of strange, crazy questions, we've always found a way to make use of the knowledge we've gained. So sometimes that takes a long time. It took over a century between Franklin's experiments with his kite and Edison's light bulb. But the more we understand nature, the more we're able to manipulate it, to control our environment, to build a technological society that can provide for all of its citizens. So I don't know how this will pay off, but I'm confident that the more we know, the better we'll be able to build a strong economy and to build a strong society.
I didn't always study biological molecules, and I think I was guided in that direction because I wanted to do something that could have a real tangible impact in people's lives. We study how small molecules can bind to proteins in the body. And these could be molecules like hormones or metabolites, but we're principally interested in how pharmaceutical drugs bind to their protein targets and how we can use this information to design the next generation of drug molecules. Biological molecules, like proteins, are in constant motion. And this motion affects how molecules can bind to these proteins. So we use computer simulation to show us in atomic detail both the motions of the proteins and the binding of drugs to their receptors. This is a challenge because the simulations we use take extremely small time steps. If we wanted to run a simulation for even just a millionth of a second, we would still need 1 billion time steps, which is a lot of work for the computer to do. So one of our chief focuses in the lab is developing new computational methods that can allow us to study these long time scale events using only microsecond scale simulations. Advances on the hardware side have really changed the game in the field, and GPU computing in particular. So everyone now is trying to not only do the same work faster, but even just reimagine what molecular simulation is capable of. It's kind of like we're all running a race and somebody comes around handing out rocket boots to everybody, and then they're trying to figure out how to use them and what they're capable of. So it's a really exciting time for the field. As a computational scientist, my lab equipment is high-performance computing hardware. So having access to ICER and to HPCC, the High Performance Computing Center, is a really valuable resource for me because now I don't have to spend time building and managing that hardware, and that's time that I can spend, training my graduate students and postdocs, getting science done and writing papers and writing grants. So it's a really great resource.
My research is often motivated by solving practical applications, especially if there's an opportunity to save lives. We use very intense lasers to look at what is known as nonlinear interactions between light and matter. The problem is that very intense laser is going to melt anything it interacts with, and you're not going to be able to get to the nonlinear optical part. The much better mechanism to look at nonlinear optics is to start with a very low intensity but long pulse, and then to compress the pulse duration. Typical compressions that we use is, for example, a factor of 1,000,000. And now you have 1,000,000 times more intensity with the same energy. We started working on compressing pulses in the year 2000. 2 years later, we're able to make the first measurements. We send the publication, and we get the most horrendous reviews one can ever imagine. But thanks to the critiques, it pushed us to demonstrate that we had understood everything, and by 2006 we had proven that this was much more accurate than any other method available at the time. It's now 2016. There isn't anything like this. The students just come in, push the button, and the pulses are compressed automatically on any device. And I think the record now is 3.8 femtoseconds. Biomedical imaging is one of the areas where we're making a very big impact. When someone develops skin cancer, it usually starts from the very top layers. And therefore, if it's detected on time and removed on time, the prognosis is really, really good. What we are trying to do to improve the concept of an optical biopsy. So you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, I don't like this lesion. Let me look at it under my new laser microscope. They put the laser microscope, and it's able to peer not on the surface, but to go to deeper and deeper layers in order to, is it cancer? What kind is it? And how deep has this cancer progressed? This would cut at least 2 months, which in the case of melanoma, which is a very fast progressive cancer, can literally mean a life or death different. We're developing this technology. It's called we call it coherence imaging, and we have now one publication on this, and all was done using ICER. In that case, the ICER was used for processing our data according to certain mathematical formulas. Another heavy use by us. Let's assume that we have some potentials and some energies and the interaction with the lasers and so on. We put all of this together into a mathematical model. The more complete the model, the more time consuming in terms of computation, so we need the speed. And then we run it through and we try to look if the results resemble our data. So that's our, how we use this great facility at MSU.
In a real sense, you and I are made of star guts. By mass, our body is mostly oxygen, and almost all of that oxygen came from one of these massive stellar explosions called supernovae, millions or billions of years ago before our sun even formed. And so if we want to understand the chemical evolution of the universe, we need to understand the process that drives these stars to explode. I'm primarily a computational nuclear astrophysicist, and I study exploding stars. And these are big stars, 10 times the mass of the sun or even more. And when they die at the end of their lives, they explode in extremely brilliant, energetic explosions. And this is something that we observe every day in the cosmos. And so what I do is try to use a computer to understand that process by simulating the explosion of massive stars. Some things that we're working on right now are trying to understand three-dimensional simulations. And so this is such a complex and expensive process computationally that only now in the last few years have we been able to even do three-dimensional simulations. Up to this point, we've only really been able to do 1D and 2D simulations, and they've mostly been what I would say is kind of misleading about the physics that goes on. And so 3D has really been a watershed in terms of our understanding of the physical mechanisms that are important in core collapse supernovae, this type of massive stellar explosion that I study. And so massive stellar evolution itself is not a solved problem. We don't fully understand the entire life history of these massive stars. But the problem is, for my type of calculation, stellar evolution of massive stars is essentially the initial conditions. And if we don't have the initial conditions right, we can't hope to find the right answer. And so one of the things that my group and I have been working on is trying to understand the three-dimensional structure of massive stars at the end of their lives. And this is something that's just never really been done before. We were the first to do it, and now some other groups are starting to do it as well. And this is also a tremendously challenging technical problem to do computationally. But we're using some new techniques, some new mathematical methods, and some new big computers to try to address this problem, to give the most realistic initial conditions for supernova simulations possible. And we're finding that it makes a big difference. It turns out that having the right initial conditions matters a lot for getting the dynamics right of these very expensive 3D simulations.
I kind of bumped into this field by accident. Right about my senior year is when my grandfather had a stroke. We kind of suddenly see from a very personal standpoint how devastating a stroke can be in terms of not only sort of the loss of movement, but also in terms of how it affects both the individual and the family. So motor learning is the learning of movement skills, whether it be early in childhood, whether you're learning how to read or how to walk, or once you're an adult, you learn how to ski or learn how to juggle. Those would be examples of what we would call motor learning. And a lot of times you realize how difficult motor learning is only when you're affected. Our goal is basically to try and understand motor learning both in the sort of healthy nervous system and also how we can use those insights for rehabilitation of movement disorders. Virtual reality is really exciting in terms of my research because it allows us to manipulate things in the environment which are, not easy to sometimes manipulate. Imagine I've had a stroke and I can't move my left arm very well. How do I give you the sense of, you should move your arm more because it's actually good for rehabilitation? By putting yourself in virtual reality where you can kind of trick them into thinking, well, that arm seems to be moving pretty well. One of the things we were looking at in a project was to look at how we could use a robot to assist in motor learning. Right? We realized this is similar to what kids do when they learn how to ride a bike. Right? So you start with the training wheels, but at some point the training wheels have to come off. Whether it's a robot or a training wheel, the principles of learning are the same, indicate that more help is not always better. We run a lot of experiments. The data that we collect from these experiments are pretty large. HPCC has really helped in terms of providing a nice storage space that can easily be linked to other projects or other faculty. Yeah.
The importance of bringing new ideas to computing is really something that represents the future of problem solving. My name's Andrew Chrislieb. I focus on scientific computing for a variety of problems. My research field is really understanding how to better approximate problems so that the computer can solve them. The computer is really good at adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. So how do you take an existing problem and turn it into a really good approximation via algebra, something the computer can do quickly and efficiently? Application area I focus on is plasma science. Plasma is the fourth state of matter. If you start with a solid and you add enough energy, it goes to a liquid. If you add more energy, it goes to a gas. And if you add even more energy, the gas breaks down into its constitutive elements of electrons and ions. So if you think about the compact fluorescents you might be using, those are actually plasmas that have been engineered to generate light. And so the processing of computer chips is done with plasmas. And so I study and model plasmas for a variety of applications. HPC has been very responsive to helping with my research. They've provided an environment where my students can try out the new ideas that we've been developing. And I think it represents an environment where people who are really interested in solving big problems come together with people who are doing new algorithms. And so I can talk about myself and a good friend of mine, Brian O'Shea. He's interested in large-scale astrophysics. I'm interested in modeling and developing better and new methods for plasma science. He works on the biggest iron there is, and I'm developing tools that are supposed to be sort of next generation versions of the tools he's developing. And so we've started collaborating, and HPCC's been sort of the common thread for us to find some really interesting discussions about science and about the role of computing in science and about what do we hope to be able to accomplish with these sorts of things. And it's been a really invigorating and changed what my research group actually does. It's actually helped refocus what my research group does.
My name is Adam Mock. I'm an assistant professor at Central Michigan University in the School of Engineering and Technology, and I'm an electrical engineering professor. My research deals broadly with photonics. Photonics is the engineering of light. It's kind of like electronics, except replace the electron with photon. So we're engineering with light, building devices. My research personally deals with three sort of target application areas: optical data communication, optical sensing, and solar energy. So broadly speaking, photonics, in particular within the realm of photonics, we're looking at engineering devices at the wavelength scale, the wavelength of light. So we're talking about devices that could fit on a human hair, the width of it. And these devices, again, target areas are data communication, optical sensing, solar energy. All those applications have aspects to them where you can make these very small devices to control light in some way. So with data communication, we're talking about controlling light to convey information or to process information. With optical sensing, we're creating these devices that you can put them into an environment and it can determine whether there is a certain chemical in the air or a certain chemical in the water just because of the way the light passes through it. And with solar energy, it's a little more obvious. We're collecting light. But the idea there is that when the light hits the solar energy collector, the solar cell, it traps the light, it keeps the light in the device, as opposed to reflecting it or letting it pass through. Try to trap all the light we can, 100% of the light, and then convert as much of that into electricity as we can. So those are the challenges that we're dealing with.
My name is Aaron Yoon. I'm a computer engineering undergraduate student at Central Michigan. We're trying to set up an experiment to test 2 photon polymerization using SU8 substrate. And right now we're making a two-dimensional stage setup using scrapped DVD drives, so we can make two-dimensional patterns in the SU8 using a laser diode.
So this is a nice experiment. So here what we've got is the light source coming in, it goes through the sample, and we measure how much power comes out.
My name is Sheldon Hewlett. I am a grad student here at Central Michigan University. I'm in the Science of Advanced Materials program, I'm a PhD student. I work with Adam Mock, and I guess you could say I do sort of the experimental side of his computation. We take a look at a lot of photonic phenomena. This is the actual detector that we're using. So light starts here, it passes through this aperture, gets sort of collimated by this lens, and then passes through another aperture to kind of narrow the beam a little bit. And then it reflects upward into the sample this way, into the detector. And then we use that's connected to this oscilloscope and to measure everything we need to measure.
The optical data communication, that's what I did a lot of my graduate work on, my PhD thesis. I actually was using high-performance computing resources a lot, actually, during my PhD work at USC in California. And then when I came to Central Michigan University, I was hoping to carry that over. I know CMU actually doesn't really have that, it doesn't really have a dedicated cluster for that kind of work. So I was very fortunate. That was actually when Central Michigan University developed the agreement with Michigan State University to sort of share the resources. And it's been great. It's very easy to log in. It's as if the resource were next door. One of the things that make sort of research that's research enabling is the infrastructure. CMU is not quite as big as some of the other places, so it's critical for us to have access to those things. So when we write proposals, it's critical that we sort of indicate that we have very intimate access to these excellent resources from a proposal standpoint, but also just from a publication, kind of day-to-day work. I'm able to log in at any time, do work and submit jobs. And also the staff has been very good. I guess I'm pretty good at doing that stuff, but when I do have a problem, I can usually get a response the same day. A question, it's fixed the same day.
My name is Jason Gallant, and I'm an assistant professor of zoology at Michigan State. My lab is basically interested in the genetic basis of behaviors and particularly animal phenotypes that are related to communication. So we primarily study electric fish, but we also work on butterflies a little bit. Our two main research questions with the electric fish are: where does the electric organ come from as a tissue in evolution? And we're also interested in, when you have an electric organ, how does it diversify through evolution and lead to communicative differences between different species of electric fish. This one's discharging so fast and so regularly that it sounds like the tones on a piano. So this is an African knifefish. He just bit the electrode because he's not happy. It started turning yellow. So we just recently published a paper in Science on the evolution of electric organs. So electric fish have evolved 6 times independently through the history of vertebrates. And so in each case, the fish have taken skeletal muscle and made electric organ out of it. This is something that puzzled Charles Darwin. When he wrote Origin of Species, he devoted a whole chapter to difficulties with this theory and considered electric fish first and foremost. So it's been a kind of a standing mystery as to how fish have done this and how they've done it so many times. So we've been looking at gene expression information across many lineages of electric fish, which involves basically taking RNA out of their electric organs, sequencing it, and then putting all those tiny pieces back together, and that's where the HPCC comes in. So we've been basically utilizing the service really heavily to assemble these transcriptome data sets and then get a better sense of which genes are expressed and how many and their relative contributions to building the electric organ. And that's been highly enabled by a lot of the resources at the HPCC. HPCC's been a critical tool in our research program. It's one of the best high-performance computing systems that I've used. I've used several from the National Science Foundation, Boston University, Cornell University. I think that MSU's had a long history of developing these tools with the users in mind, and I think it really shows. It's incredibly easy to use, logically laid out. My laboratory has a number of undergraduates working right now, and they're using it with great success. So it's been nothing but positive.
I'm Anil Jain. I'm a University Distinguished Professor in the Department of Computer Science at MSU, and I've been here for 40 years. What you see in crime scene investigations shows CSI and so on, it appears that the problems are solved, but the incomplete fingerprints which are lifted at the crime scenes and then they have to be matched with the large database of fingerprints, that's not an easy problem. And one of the breakthroughs from our lab is how do we successfully match latent fingerprints, improve the quality of these fingerprints using techniques like image enhancement, as well as to look at whether these fingerprints are natural or they've been altered in some ways. And now pattern recognition is also known as machine learning and data mining. So basically in every scientific field we collect huge amounts of data, and the size of the data is growing both in terms of numeric data, images and voice, video. And what we try to do is to understand the structure and characteristics of this data, and we do it by both supervised learning and unsupervised learning, which is called also classification and clustering. if we have a huge database, say 100 million faces, and we want to study some characteristics of these faces, can we group these faces in terms of their similarity? HPCC allows us to use their big cluster consisting of 200 nodes, and that facilitates our getting the results in a timely manner.
We've been using HPCC to fit some statistical models to multiple mugshot and face images of about 20,000 subjects, and the goal of doing so is to try and see if there's a decrease in the face recognition performance as a subject ages over time.
I'm Kuhan. I'm postdoc with Dr. Zin in this project named age, gender, and race estimation from a single image. So we have a very large database, such as the MORPH database and the PTEL database. In the MORPH database, we have about 78,000 images, and in the PTEL database, we have 100,000 images. So the training will take a long time. So the HPCC makes it possible for me to train my system.
The good thing about HPCC that I found was I can even run large memory jobs, and I've even went ahead and I clustered up 1.5 billion documents. Algorithm that I came in and using a distributed system in the HPCC, I was able to do it under 45 minutes. So that was like an amazing thing that really helped me.
So even though the algorithms are becoming more efficient in terms of computation time, in terms of memory, and the desktop computers are getting faster, but at the same time the size of the databases is also growing. So this is where HPCC facility really assists us.
When there is a competition between design and evolution, usually evolution wins. I'm Chris Adami. I'm a professor for microbiology and molecular genetics, as well as a professor for physics and astronomy here at Michigan State University. And in my group, we use high-performance computing to evolve brains. So we try to evolve behaviors such as swarming, or behaviors such as visual recognition of objects and appropriate behavior. We also try to evolve complex traits such as the ability to form hierarchies or anything that we might think is interesting when it comes to the slow emergence of intelligent behavior. If we were able to evolve agents that can behave appropriately in their world, this would make a fantastic tool for robotics.
So the thing is, of course, it has never seen this.
Yeah, it's never seen this.
But apparently it still reacts.
Yeah, he's considered like lepers.
If you just program a robot to open exactly one type of doorknob, well, it can only open that one, and every single other one it will basically fail to do so. We believe that if you evolve brains in complex worlds where there are these concepts like doors, then once you know the concept, then it's not difficult to apply it to different instances. But that is not what happens normally in design, and to generate this power of generalization seems to be very, very difficult when it comes to an algorithmic design approach. We believe the evolutionary approach can circumvent all these problems so that you can actually go and have robots that will not have trouble opening arbitrary doors, going up arbitrary stairs, and closing arbitrary valves rather than just very, very specific ones. HPC, sits right there at the intersection of what biologists are doing, physicists are doing, and then engineers and computer scientists are doing. Because our work sits also right at this interface between the physical sciences and the biological sciences. HPC, particular ISO here at Michigan State University is ideal because we have the type of computer scientists who do understand biological problems, and we have all of these biologists that also understand the compute aspects of the problem. And There are not that many institutes in the world which are so interdisciplinary, where we can ask these questions and we can get the kind of support from both sides of the field.
So I'm a theoretical astrophysicist. What I do is simulations of galaxy formation and evolution. So basically I study how galaxies in the universe have evolved from after the Big Bang to the present day. One of the interesting projects that we've done with the HPCC is actually use it to model how the earliest galaxies in the universe formed. And so we used quite a bit of supercomputing time on the supercomputer here to study lots and lots of different galaxies and how they went from essentially being a completely uniform, homogeneous universe to forming the first stars in the universe to forming forming galaxies that were big enough that you could actually see with the Hubble Space Telescope. So I plan to use the HPCC more in the future. It's always been a useful part of my research group's efforts, but as my research directions evolve, a facility like the High Performance Computing Center just becomes sort of more and more useful as a place where we can do local computation and very quick turnaround computation. So I sort of see that that's going to be quite useful to me in the future.
Most of my research is focused in East Africa. We're trying to understand how complex terrain in East Africa is changing because people are expanding agriculture, there's urban growth, and many other factors that change the surface dynamics. I'm Nathan Moore. I'm an assistant professor in geography. I do climate modeling, and I'm trying to integrate climate change and impacts with land use change and agricultural modeling. Those changes in surfaces impact the climate both locally and regionally. And we're trying to understand how those changes might affect the weather and ultimately food production in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. The problem with doing these predictions is A, we cannot predict the future very well, and B, we can't integrate climate change and agricultural modeling very effectively yet because there are other factors besides weather that influence crops. For example, economics. For example, land tenure and land ownership. So we're taking this from more of the physical perspective side and trying to understand at least what are some of the constraints that a hotter or drier or wetter climate might impose on the extent of agriculture that we can pursue in East Africa. I also work in the Amazon looking at changes in deforestation and expansion of soybean farms to try to better understand if the large-scale circulation of the Amazon basin is being changed by changes in land use, by modification of the land surface. Finally, I've been doing some work in China to try to understand how top-down government policies have altered the structure of the landscape. We want to understand how removal of forest and transformation of some of the best agricultural land on the planet into cities is changing temperature, water flow, and other factors that are vital to the survival of China at the very time that it's increasing its pressures on the environment. Climate models are three-dimensional cubes of atmosphere. I simulate about 1 million points in the air, and I solve equations of motion, conservation of heat and momentum, and so forth for every point. That's a huge computational load, and HPCC has been very good
at providing us a basic framework to not only get all the data on there to run the models, but to actually do the processing in a quick and timely fashion. To do simulations at resolutions that were really not available 5, 6 years ago. And in addition to doing these intensive climate simulations, I also have to do crop simulations, and so that we've been working on developing code onto the HPC to simulate crops. And the flexibility and the ease of getting other students onto the HPC has been really good at replicating experiments, trying new perturbations, and trying to really find out where is that boundary in the physical world. Where should we be looking for? If you have the computational power, you can really diagnose the physics of the system pretty well.
My research focuses on the area of digital evolution. What digital evolution is basically a way of studying how evolution occurs in nature, as well as how we can harness evolution in order to solve engineering problems with all of the experiments taking place inside of a computer. So digital organisms are just self-replicating computer programs, but they're fully functional computer programs. And we take populations of these self-replicating computer programs. You can kind of think of them like computer viruses, but very well controlled. And we put them in sometimes very complex environments where there's noise in the environment. And so as they're copying themselves, they'll make mistakes. So these mistakes are like mutations. And over time, they will evolve to better and better solve problems that they encounter in their environment, much like how natural organisms will evolve to solve problems from their environment. So one of the projects that I'm most excited about recently, actually we just had a paper come out about this, is the evolution of multicellularity. So how do organisms evolve from being single cellular, like bacteria, to multicellular, and particularly really complex multicellular where different cells are doing different things and interacting in all sorts of ways so that the overall organism is much more fit. So as you can imagine, this sort of work with self-replicating computer programs is very computationally intensive. And the HPCC gives us so many of the resources that we need in order to not just do one of these digital evolution runs, but to do many of them so that we can compare how evolution occurs across all these different instances and develop general principles about evolution. And without the HPCC, we would never have the statistical power, the rigor behind these experiments to really draw tight conclusions. Additionally, it allows us to have much more realistic digital organisms. So it allows them to be very expressive in what they can do, because at times we'll have tens of thousands of computer programs needing to be running simultaneously in a single population. And the HPCC allows us to do that so quickly and effectively that it doesn't break up the flow of our research to just stop and have to wait months or whatever. We can typically get results back in days, or in the most complex cases, a week. And that is really, really quite wonderful.
My lab focuses on, actually our whole unit focuses on, is trying to control specific diseases to chickens. As you can imagine, people like to eat chickens. And here in the US, just a bit of trivia, we process 1 million birds per hour. And so it's very important to control diseases because the birds are grown in high intensity areas. If there's an infectious disease, you can imagine that they spread rather easily from one bird to another. So the industry mainly relies on what we would call biosecurity. So they want to keep the living conditions of the birds very clean. And they also then rely on other control measures. In particular, what we work on are two things. One are vaccination, as well as my more interest is on genetic resistance. So what I try to do is make birds more resistant. In particular, the one disease that I work on is known as Marek's disease, which is, from a technical term, it's actually a herpes virus that causes T-cell lymphoma. So it causes cancers in birds. So obviously, if you're a meat-type bird and you get this disease, you're going to get tumors and you're unfit for human consumption. And if you're an egg-type chicken and you get the disease, well, then you stop laying eggs. And so that's not a good thing. And so that's what our lab focuses on, is trying to improve basically animal health, and in this case, chickens. That we generate a lot of data. So this is very common now in the field known as genomics, is that one performs a lot of DNA or RNA sequencing to be able to characterize either the genome of the individual or what are known as the RNA or the transcripts of the individual. And so you generate lots and lots of data, and consequently you need to be able to have ways to be able to analyze it, and that's where we need the high performance computer capacity that's available through the HPCC. Many of my students have taken advantage of the in-house counseling or service that are provided, and they've been very helpful. They've also been very helpful when we've needed to install particular special programs. They've been very helpful. It's just been wonderful to have this facility here. I think it's rather unique because I do collaborate with a lot of other people at various universities, and they don't seem to have this kind of level of support. So I think MSU is very lucky to have this sort of overall service facility that's provided.